Yo ho ho, so today I'm doing a book review on The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. So the story is told in a flashback form. Originally it starts out with our main character David, who is discussing his wives and how that they don't know any experience about sort of pain and suffering. They think they do, but they don't, and he comes off that he really resents them and he's very bitter, and he kind of comes off as a bit misogynist. There's a bit of a misogynistic wave coming off him, but he then recollects back into his childhood. His neighbours, the Chandler family, gain two new members because Meg and Susan are two girls whose parents recently died, and they are sent to live with kind of distant relatives who happen to be Ruth and her three children. Ruth is like a distant aunt, and Ruth is a single mother. She has three children, Donnie, Ralph and Willie. She is a raging alcoholic, and she also has a severe mental illness that her children seem to have inherited. Now David is witnessing all of this because it's a small neighbourhood. These are the kids that he plays with all the time because they're the kids right next door, and he starts developing a bit of a crush on Meg, the older girl. Ruth sees this, and I don't know whether she's projecting because she's seeing herself when she was younger, or if she's just completely batshit crazy, which can also be, you know, that theory is definitely up there, because she sees Meg as a girl who will get herself into trouble, so to say, and she starts verbally abusing her and physically abusing her. After a time, Meg decides to tell a police officer about the abuse, but he dismisses it as tall tale, and that's when Ruth really hits the roof and just completely loses her mind. She ties Meg up in the family's bomb shelter and tells her kids, you can do whatever you want to her, go ahead, whatever you think of, do it to her. And that's what happens. Other local kids come over to the house and they just experiment on Meg. At first they're very reluctant to do anything to her because they're so weirded out by the whole situation, but Ruth just kind of starts it off, completely encourages any sort of humiliation, and it's, you know, it's not just humiliation, it's full-blown abuse. This includes stripping her, beating her, urinating on her, scalding her with hot water, carving words into her body, burning her with cigarettes, starving her. Basically anything you can do to torture another human being, these kids and Ruth inflict upon her. Now David, our narrator, is just watching all this, and I found him so incredibly frustrating because yeah, he's only a little kid, and yeah, it's the 1950s, and you couldn't really just run into your parents and be like, hey, our neighbours have a girl captive in their bomb shelter and they're torturing her. You know, it wasn't a time for that, but it's still extremely frustrating. You want to shake him by the shoulders and say, do something, get help for this girl. And at one point he does try his best to help her, but it doesn't work out, unfortunately. Meg is also terrified that Ruth will start abusing her sister, and Ruth does abuse her sister, like, but nothing to the severity of what Meg experiences. So like Ruth holds that over her head of like, if you don't behave, then I'll do this to Susan. And she's probably the worst character I've ever read in the history of ever, so like it gets that award. I wouldn't classify this book as horror. I think it's more thriller / torture porn, although there are scenes in this book that are absolutely horrific. They didn't really pack a punch for me because so many people had hyped it up to me and said, you're gonna love it, you're gonna find it the most disturbing book you've ever read. Yeah, it's disturbing, and the fact that it was inspired by a true murder is even more disturbing. There is one scene in this book near the end that is just utterly horrific. I found it quite difficult to read, even though it's quick, but it is horrible, and it's so difficult to talk about it without spoiling it for you all. But like I said, basically if you're into torture, like extreme scenes of torture and gore, you'll definitely probably enjoy this book. I found that it lacked a bit in character development. Like I would have liked to see what made Ruth so crazy, aside from my own assumptions about like what it was that really made her tick. And the fact that it went into her children when they got older, I thought that was kind of interesting, even though I felt like it was very quick. It was just a snippet. It was just like a snippet of the flashback. But yeah, so like I said, I can't figure out whether I liked it or not really. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, which is, it's a good rating. It's like, I thought it was grand, but like I said, I feel like the downfall of this book for me was that too many people hyped it up and got my hopes up for it. I just felt like a disconnect with it, like I couldn't get immersed in that world. One of the reasons is probably I didn't want to get immersed in that kind of world. I felt like it could have been thicker. He could have just had a bit more in there, a bit more character development. It just felt like the foundation of the book wasn't very stable. I don't know, there's something that just didn't click with me. But like I said, I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, which is a perfectly good rating. I thought it was grand, I thought it was interesting. So let me know if you've read this book, and I hope you enjoy this video, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.